looking at HTML widgets and form overrides in FinPower Connect. As we move towards a more cloud-based future, we've been developing HTML widget options for standard processes and functions within FinPower Connect. We've also introduced the ability to override the standard forms with these widgets. Widgets are a great way to customize processes and modernize the appearance of processes within FinPower Connect and FinPower Connect Cloud. Due to their customizable nature, things like colors, pages, buttons, etc., can be updated to suit a site's individual branding requirements or preferences. In addition, where a client is using both systems, keeping the widget color scheme the same between Cloud and FinPower Connect may be desirable, as an example. The functionality we're showing today is based on overriding standard forms with HTML widgets while not being licensed for FinPower Connect Cloud. However, the same functionality is also available if you are licensed, plus additional options, such as the ability to change the widget styling from the user interface via the Cloud configuration menu. So first things first, we'll show you how to override the standard forms where available with the system supplied HTML widgets. We head over to the Tools menu, Web FinPower Connect Cloud Configuration menu. We will see a cut down version of the menu we reviewed last week. For the purposes of this session, as mentioned, we're deliberately showcasing what those who are not licensed for FinPower Connect Cloud will see, in part because it's simplified in the sense we can only see the options available for form overrides, but also to make this video relevant for all users and reduce confusion for non-cloud users with the additional menu options. As you can see, we have 4 form pages available with wizards that can be overridden by HTML widgets. Take account, for example. We can see there is a list of 15 account-related wizards that can be overridden, like the account close wizard and the account payment arrangement wizard. To override the FinPower Connect wizard with the widget, you simply tick the form override option. In this summary, additional information can be found, including the parameters, which can be useful to use to see if any parameter customization may be required. For example, with the payment promise wizard, setting the promise mode to true. To customize widget parameters, you can click on the purple button here, ensuring that customize script parameters is ticked, and select the relevant options. You'll also see that there is a script column here, and we can see there are a couple of widget scripts defined here. This means that instead of using the overriding the standard FinPower Connect wizard with the system supplied widget, the form is being overridden by a widget script, meaning a custom widget. Parameter defaults for these can also be amended via the script form itself, which we'll see a bit later on. If you were licensed for FinPower Connect Cloud, this is also how you would override the system widgets within FinPower Connect Cloud itself with a custom widget. Looking at the client page, we can see 4 wizards available to be overridden, being the new client wizards for both individuals and organizations, the client contact method wizard, and the client contact address wizard. On the process page, we have 4 wizards available: the document create wizard, the income investment report export, the securitization allocation wizard, and the action update request wizard. Looking back up at the account application page, we can see there are options to override the accept or decline wizard and the account application monitor category change wizard. Now, there are more application options which are available via the admin library. So that's heading to admin account application types, and if we load our example one here and head to the data capture page, we can see that there are numerous HTML widget options that can be defined here for various purposes. There are also HTML widget options for the Centrix commercial credit reporting, which is located in Global Settings, under the Account Scripts page, under HTML widget here. You can also create a task pane link to launch a widget as well, like I have done here as an option. And finally, there are options to have widgets defined in Task Manager for things like reports, and even more so in Task Manager 2, where functional widgets are used for tasks and workflows, and additional options can be added, but that is next week's session. And of course, HTML widgets can be used on workflow items, which we've covered in our workflow sessions already. So now we'll have a brief look at these form overrides in action. On the account form, you may remember we have the promise wizard overridden, but not the payment arrangement wizard. So for example, if we clicked the payment arrangement button, our standard form launches. But if we click the make a promise button, instead we get the widget. Fairly straightforward. It may not be immediately obvious that it is the widget and not the wizard that's launching to an end user, particularly where the styling is similar, like in our client example here. If we click the address move button, it looks fairly similar, but you'll often see initializing when it first launches, and you may see an advanced button down the bottom and you won't see separate tabs. So it's a good way to identify that it's the widget and not the wizard. The address entry operates differently on this widget as well. For example, if I type in an address here, we get the live feedback via the Google API, which doesn't occur in the standard form. You may remember that we overrode that, but we didn't override the contact method. So if we click that again, we can see that our standard form launches instead of the widget. Next, we'll show you how to import the included system supplied HTML widgets, which can be a good starting point for any customizations if required. So to import any of the system supplied widgets, we just go to the admin menu, scripts, and down here under the import special header, there's the option to import an HTML widget. As you can see, there's quite an extensive list here. Some won't necessarily be relevant, particularly where there's no out-of-the-box form override. However, you can easily filter this list by using the quick search. For example, if I typed in new account, it filters it right down to the exact one I'm looking for. You can either click on it and click OK, or double click and it will import this for you. Then all you need to do is give it a meaningful code, for example, HTML or widget new, or whatever your normal naming conventions may be. However, as I understand it, it's important not to include a dot for HTML widgets, particularly where they may be used over in FinPower Connect Cloud, just as a side note. There are a few options available for adjustment when importing the widget. For example, on the parameters page, any of the widget's standard parameters will be shown here, and defaults can be defined or changed if required. The script form itself has a test function, which is useful when testing any changes before overriding. However, as there's usually dependent items, when testing a widget, it's important to know what you'll need to enter on testing. What I mean by this, as an example, if you were testing the payment promise widget, it requires an account ID to function. When launching from the account form itself, the account ID is automatically passed into the widget. When testing from the scripts form, you have to give it one. For this reason, when you hit the test button from the scripts page, the first page you'll always see is the parameters page, which of course you don't see when launching from the relevant form in FinPower Connect, or when using the functionality in FinPower Connect Cloud, of course. So for example here, a parameter might be an account ID drop-down list, which allows you to select the account that you are going to be processing as part of your test. Customizations may be required where a client would like to add in additional functions, such as completing additional fields and updating user data, or to remove visibility of some fields if and where appropriate, or changes to the look of the widget over and above the out-of-the-box options. Generally speaking, using custom widgets is now preferable to wizard validator scripts, as wizard validators are not available in FinPower Connect Cloud. So for future proofing, and in many cases greater flexibility, an HTML widget would be a preferable option. We're developing new HTML widgets regularly, so it's really important to keep an eye out for newly released or updated widgets when new versions of FinPower Connect and FinPower Connect Cloud are released. This is even more important if you're using a customized widget, as any new changes to the standard widgets should be integrated into your custom widget to ensure things keep working as expected, and also to update any newly added features. And lastly, if there isn't an override ability, there are ways to use custom widgets in conjunction with other functionality, such as an action script and adding in a custom button on a summary page to launch a widget. But as this involves scripting, I'll leave that to the experts who will cover that off in a code session down the track. So we've come to the end of our session for today, but as always, if there's any additional information you seek, don't hesitate to contact application support for user interface queries or code support in relation to code-specific questions, as there's many scripting events available throughout many processes involving widgets that can be utilised for custom requirements. Next week, we're covering off Task Manager 2, folders and tasks.